Chaim. In the beginning of this week's Parshas Matos, we speak about a person who makes a promise, who makes an oath. And the Torah writes that if ish ki yidar neder, if a person makes a promise, Lashem, he swears an oath, lest or Yisrael nafshay, to prohibit something for himself. Which is translated as he should not violate his words, he should do whatever came out of his mouth. But Rashi immediately quotes the words lo yachel, which usually is translated as violating, but Rashi says that actually it means, it's from the word yechalel, which means to profane. And Rashi quotes the Medrash that says, "Lo yaseh devarav chulin." He shouldn't treat his words as if they were unholy. That's usually what the word chulin means. And there seems to be a bit of a strange way to express it. The Torah, should have said, "Lo yavar al devari." He shouldn't transgress his promise. But the Torah says you shouldn't treat your promise as if it wasn't holy, as if it was mundane. You shouldn't profane your words. So what exactly is the message here, and why does the Torah use these words? So we'll start off with a very, very well-known story. The Gemara in Brachos, Daf Samach Hamud Beis, tells us the famous story of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was once traveling with some of the students, and it was getting dark outside, and they needed a place to stay. So they come into a certain town, and Rabbi Akiva knocks on the first door, and he says, I need a place to stay for the night. And the guy's like, sorry, we don't, no, guests are not welcome in this town. Okay, it's fine. He goes to the next house, and he gets the same message from one house to the other, and basically they tell him, you can't stay in any of our houses. Okay, maybe I'll go to, find some park bench or something that I can lay down on. And he finds like a local park, and he wants to, settle down over there. When a police officer comes by, I'm sorry, we have these rules against, we passed these homeless laws. No sleeping on park benches. So he was like, okay, so where am I supposed to go? Is there an inn? Is there a hotel? And they say, no visitors, no guests allowed in this town. So Rabbi Akiva turns to his students and he says, everything Hashem does he does for the good. So we'll have to find somewhere else to stay. So they leave the city and they go into the woods outside of the city, and they set up a place somewhere between the trees. Right? So Rabbi Akiva and the students have all their stuff loaded up on a donkey. They take it out into the woods. And Rabbi Akiva, of course, it's starting to get dark, and he has his svarim with him. He takes some svarim off the donkey, and he sits down to learn. And since it's dark, of course, he lights the candle before it gets dark, and he starts learning. As he's sitting there and learning, a powerful gust of wind comes by and blows out the candle. Rabbi Akiva says, okay, let me try to light it again. It's very windy, and whenever he tries to light it, he can't even light the candle again. And again, he turns to his students and he says, whatever Hashem does, it's for the good. Okay, at least let's make sure we get up nice and early tomorrow morning. Right, let me get my alarm clock ready. In those days, didn't have alarm clocks, so Rabbi Akiva used to travel around, the Gemara says, with a rooster to wake him up bright and early in the morning. Right, so he makes sure the rooster is right next to where he's sleeping. That way the rooster is going to wake him up. And he lays down to go to sleep, and suddenly there's like a funny noise, and some wild cat came out and attacked the rooster and killed his rooster. Again, he turns to his students, and he says, Kol ma David rachmana l'tavavid. Everything Hashem does is for the best. Okay? They're trying to get some sleep, but then they hear this very strange and scary noise. It sounds like a large animal's approaching, and suddenly they hear the roar of a lion right nearby. They all freeze. The lion leaps towards them and attacks Rabbi Akiva's donkey and kills it. And again, Rabbi Akiva turns to his students, and what does he say? Everything Hashem does is for the good. And they go to sleep that night. They got up the next morning. I don't know how early they got up without the rooster, but I'm sure, they get up the next morning. Or actually, I think they got up in the middle of the night because they heard sounds nearby. They heard marching in the distance, and they weren't sure what it was, but they kept quiet. And finally, in the morning, it became clear that a Roman legion had passed through the area and had plundered the nearby city and taken everybody captive. And Rabbi Akiva turns to his students and he says, "Didn't I tell you? Didn't I tell you that everything Hashem does is for the best?" Right? If we would have been in that city, who knows what would have happened to us? If the candle, the rooster, or the donkey would have been awake, would have been here while the soldiers came by, we could have been discovered. Didn't I tell you that whatever Hashem does is for the good? So, of course, the story, we all familiar with the story, it's a very powerful message, but what's a little bit strange is the ending of the story. Rabbi Akiva turns to his students and says, "I told you, right? I told you so, right? Didn't I tell you whatever Hashem does is for the good?" Right? Rabbi Akiva doesn't seem like the type of guy to say, "I told you so." Right? This is a little bit out of character for Rabbi Akiva. The Ben Ish Chai asks, why does Rabbi Akiva turn to his students and say, "Didn't I tell you that whatever Hashem does is for the good?" Why does he say this to his students? So the Belzer Rebbe moved to Tel Aviv after the Second World War. And at that time, there weren't a lot of Hasidim with him, and they lived in a mostly secular area. There were most of the Jews around him were not religious, and a lot of his Hasidim were not used to this, right? Europe, where they came from, everybody who lived in their city, in their neighborhood, was religious, and they weren't very happy about living amongst non-religious Jews, and they started to talk and say not nice things about them. But the Belzer Rebbe was always very careful. He was told to be quiet, never to say something bad about another Jew. And not only that, whenever they saw a Jew doing something which appeared to be a sin, the Rebbe was always very careful to try to be melamed zchus. Just find something good to say about them. Find something good to say about them. Right? They would walk into shul on Shabbos, and they would see people driving in the street. So what would the Rebbe say? Must be somebody sick. Let's say some tehillim for a sick person who has to drive on Shabbos. Right? It must be a life-threatening situation. And the Chassidim weren't very happy. They all knew none of these people are sick, right? And one Shabbos, they're walking down the street and they see this big tractor driving down the main road. And one of the Chassidim looks at the tractor driver and is going to work on Shabbos. And the Rebbe says, "No, he's going to the hospital. There's somebody sick and he's going for pikuach nefesh." The Chas is a car I could kind of understand, but a tractor? So he runs after the tractor, right? And he follows the tractor, and sure enough, it's heading straight to the hospital. They get to the hospital, and this pregnant woman comes out. She had gone into labor, and he runs over to the tractor driver, and he's like, "Listen, you couldn't take your car to the hospital. You have to take the tractor." And he says, "No, I was heading to work, but on the way to work, somebody stopped me. They told me there was this pregnant woman who just gone into labor, so I agreed to take her to the hospital." Right? So what exactly was going on over here? Right? It was obviously most tractors are not going to the hospital. Why was it specifically this tractor that was? Because when a tzaddik says something, right, especially when you say something with out of love for a fellow Jew, we know that when we're taught tzaddik goizer v'akadosh baruch hu mekayim, every word that comes out of a tzaddik's mouth goes straight to Hashem, and Hashem tries to fulfill the words of a tzaddik, right? And therefore, it may be true that 99% of tractors are not going to the hospital, right? But if the Rebbe sees a tractor and he says that this is where it's going, it can't be any other way. It's got to be like that. And this, says the Ben Ish Chai, is what's going on with Rabbi Akiva. Yes?
But that means that Hashem had the pregnant woman pregnant, and the guy came in before the Rebbe.
Of course, Hashem is above time, right? So there's no difference in past and future in the eyes of Hashem. So this, says the Ben Ish Chai, is what Rabbi Akiva was telling his students. He was telling his students, "Didn't I tell you that everything is for the best? What was he telling them? He wasn't saying that, everything Hashem does for the best, we have to believe in it. That's a different, that's a very important fundamental aspect of our faith, right? That we have to believe that everything Hashem does is for the best. Okay, Akiva was telling them, in our lives, there are many things that Hashem does that's for the best, and we don't see how it's for the best. So why did Rabbi Akiva merit to see it the next morning so clearly? So he turns to the students, you know why we saw it clearly? Because I didn't just believe in it. I said it, and every step of the way, I made sure to say this is for the best. And that's what he's telling his students. He says, see what I was telling you? This is what I was telling you. The reason why it happened, says the Ben Ish Chai, the reason why it became so clear to us, and it became so obvious, and we're able to see how everything Hashem did is for the best, is because I didn't just think about it and believe it somewhere in the back of my mind. It's because I told you. I said it out loud, I said it to you, and I said it multiple times. Every step of the way. Everything Hashem does is for the best, and that's why, because of my words actually have the power to change, what may have been a situation where we wouldn't have seen how it's clearly good, right? But because we said it, we were able to see clearly how everything Hashem does is for the best. And we have to realize that our words are not just expressing a feeling that we have inside of us. Our words actually have power, and our words have holiness. Right? The Torah says that when Hashem created Adam Harishon, He created him. Hashem created Adam b'tzelem Elokim, in the image of God. What does it mean in the image of God? So God had just finished creating the world, and as Onkelos translates that the person became alive, l'nefesh chaya, he says l'ruach memalala. Hashem gave a person a very special power of speech. And the power of speech that Hashem gave us is similar to the power of speech that Hashem has. What is the power of speech that Hashem has? So we're taught in Pirkei Avos that Hashem created the world through his speech. Hashem's words are holy, and everything Hashem said immediately came into existence. And this is a power that Hashem really gave to every one of us. Hashem gave us the power that when we say something, right, when we speak words, those words actually have power to create and to accomplish something. They can change the reality in this world. Shortly after, but how do we go about this, right? Because we all say things and we don't really see how everything we says comes true. It would be great. Everything I said happened right away. So what's the secret? How do we make sure that our words actually have power? How do we make sure that lo yachel devarai, that our words do not become profane, are not treated as unholy? So shortly after the Holocaust, somebody came to the Kapushnitzer Rebbe, Rav Rami Shua Heschel, grandson of the Apter of. He lived in America after the Second World War, and he was approached by somebody who had just emigrated from Europe, had just come to America, and had a big problem. He came to Ellis Island. He wanted to come into the country, and they went through his papers, and they said, you can go in, but your wife cannot come in. Your wife has to be sent back. And I don't know, I'm not sure what the paperwork was, what the issue was. Immigration has always been complicated. I mean, today it's a lot easier. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but right? I just do this today. Illegal immigration is a lot easier. With legal immigration, I don't think it's changed much over the past few years, right? But legal immigration is a complex thing. Right, and I actually said sorry. His wife was sick, not feeling well, and because of health reasons, they didn't want to allow her into the country. Right, and so she was on Ellis Island, and they told her that in the next few days they're going to deport her back to Europe. And he was broken. They had just gone through a lot, I don't know exactly what they had gone through during the war. And he came to the Rebbe and he was crying and he said, this is, after what we went through, what I felt that my life wasn't really worth living. This was like our last hope to come to America. if they send my wife back, I obviously can't stay here without her. Our life is over, he said. And he broke down and he started to cry. He wasn't able to get up from the floor. And so the Rebbe turned to him. And the Rebbe said, don't worry. You have nothing to worry about, the Rebbe says. I promise you that by next week, your wife will be allowed into the country together with you. Wow, a smile lit up his face. Amazing. He thanked the Rebbe. He was so excited. He went out, contact some immigration lawyers, I guess, to try to bring the Rebbe's bracha to fruition. And one of the Hasidim who was with the Rebbe said, Rebbe, you make such a promise. You can give a bracha. Bracha is one thing. But to give a promise like that? An open miracle? Where do you get the ability to make such a promise? Right? How could you make such a promise? So the Rebbe says...
Which Rebbe was it?
What?
Which Rebbe?
This is the Kapishnitzer Rebbe. And so the Rebbe says, right now, I have one thing that I'm worried about. That is this Jew who's sitting there crying on the floor. He's broken. He feels like his life is over. Who knows what he can do in the situation that he's in right now. And I have a responsibility to make sure that he's okay. And the only way for me to do that is by promising him that his wife will be allowed in. Right? Now, for the next week, he's going to be okay. He's going to be happy. Now, if a week passes by and my promise doesn't end up happening, so he'll be very angry at me. He's going to call me a liar. Right? And I'll be a liar if that happens. Right? But that's not what I'm worried about right now. Right now, I was focused on helping him. And that's what I did. That was my obligation right now. Now, once I did that obligation, now I have to worry about my promise, trying to make sure that I'm not a liar. So the Rebbe pulls out a book of Tehillim, and he starts davening. And he says, Hashem, I did what I had to do. Right? I had this Jew is in trouble, and I calmed him down. I cheered him up. But now I have a big problem. I made a promise. I have no way of keeping my promise. Hashem, don't let me become a liar. And don't let this poor Jew suffer. Right? And he spent all night. He didn't go to sleep that night. He spent all night davening. Davening to Hashem to allow him to fulfill his promise. And the next morning, the guy came back with the news that they allowed his wife. So, if we want, we all make a lot of promises and we say a lot of things, and we all want Hashem to fulfill the words that we say. The question is, how many of us stay up all night davening to Hashem and saying, Hashem, my word is there. I don't want a word that I said to be false, right? If we really care about our words, and every word that comes out of our mouth is holy, and it's important to us, so what the Torah is telling us is that if you, in your mind, you don't profane your words, then in Hashem's eyes it'll also be holy. If in your eyes your words are holy, yes, then in Hashem's eyes it'll be holy as well. Yeah.
The Rebbe didn't only daven, wasn't even davening for himself.
So he was davening for both. He davened, first of all, for this other Jew who needed to be helped, but he also felt that he had skin in the game, right? Because he made a promise. Baruch was a very wealthy businessman, and he was, in general, very happy in life, but there was one thing that he was missing, and that was children. He had been married for many years, and him and his wife had not been blessed with children. And, of course, he knew, what does he have to do to get children? He has to go to his Rebbe. His Rebbe was the Aryeh the Shpaler Zayda, and he went to his Rebbe to ask his Rebbe for a bracha for children. And the Rebbe kind of pushed him off. Okay, he went back again, asked the Rebbe again, and this went on for weeks, for months, and years, right? And the Rebbe never really gave him the bracha that he wanted. One time he decides, that's it, I'm going to go to the Rebbe and I'm not going to leave until I get my bracha, right? I'm going to drive the Rebbe crazy until he agrees to give me a bracha. So he goes to the Shvaler Zayda, and he says, Rebbe, I'm here. I need a bracha. I need a promise from you that I'm going to have a son. I'm going to have a child. So the Rebbe says, listen, Baruch, this is not the best time right now. Right now, there's a communal matter that I'm very involved in. I have to pray. There's I don't know the details. There was some sort of decree in heaven that he had to annul against the Jewish community. And he says, right now, I can't focus on your blessing. You can come back tomorrow or a different time and we'll talk about it. But right now is not the right time. I'm involved in praying for the community. So Baruch thinks to himself, what better time than now, right? The Rebbe is praying for the community. The Rebbe is going to heaven. His prayers are ascending to heaven. It's the best time. Let me drive the Rebbe crazy right now. And he says, no, Rebbe, I'm not leaving. I'm going to stay here until you give me the bracha. And the Rebbe turns away. He says, listen, I'll come back tomorrow. We'll talk. No, I need a bracha right now. So the Rebbe turns away from him and he goes back to his prayers. And Baruch's not going to let the Rebbe get away with this. He walks in front of the Rebbe and he starts sticking his face in the Rebbe's siddur. He starts talking, not letting the Rebbe concentrate. The Rebbe's trying to concentrate in his prayers. Baruch's not letting him do whatever he wants to do. And the Rebbe says, listen, Baruch, I told you have to leave. It's not And Baruch, who's not used to take no for an answer, right? In his business, everybody listens to whatever he says. He's considered a very important and prominent person. He's not going to let the Rebbe tell him no, especially when it comes to having children. He says, absolutely not, Rebbe. I'm here. I'm not leaving. The Rebbe says, if you don't, the Rebbe starts getting very frustrated. And the Rebbe says, listen, if you don't leave now, you're going to end up regretting it. Right. And he still doesn't go away. He's like, no, Rebbe, I'm right here. I'm not leaving. You got to give me a bracha. I'm not leaving until I get a bracha. I want you to promise me that I'm going to have a child. And the Rebbe again tries to, not to turn away from him. But again, he's following the Rebbe around. And he's not letting the Rebbe focus at all. And finally, the Rebbe gets very upset. And the Rebbe turns to him and he says, Baruch, I promise you that you will not have a child. He had never heard such words or even imagined that the Rebbe could say such words to him. And he was completely broken. He left the room crying. And, what could he do? Right? The Rebbe promised him that he's not going to have children. Okay? He felt very bad. He cried. He did tshuva. But what do? You have the Rebbe promised that he's not going to have children, right? So he spent the next few months repenting, doing tshuva, trying to pray to Hashem to undo this promise. But he wasn't very. He didn't feel like he has a very good chance of it happening. A year later, he arrived in the city of Karetz. And, well, I'm not sure exactly if for business reasons or for other reasons, he had to spend some time in the city of Karetz. And when he goes to the shul there, he sees that there's this rabbi who's sitting there and learning this, the Tzadik, Parshas of Karetz, who at that time was still unknown. He was still, he wasn't known in the world yet as a big tzaddik, but obviously everybody in the city knew that he was a holy tzaddik. And when Baruch saw him, he realized this is a very special person, right? And he's not going to his Rebbe, the Shvaler Zayda, anymore after the story that happened, so he figures he can find a new tzaddik to connect with, right? So he starts hanging around in Karetz, next to Parshas of Karetz, and he starts asking around about this tzaddik. Nobody really knows much about him, and he finds out that Parshas of Karetz doesn't have any Hasidim, doesn't have any followers at this time. He was still unknown, and he didn't have any job or any work, and he was basically completely penniless, right? And he struggled to put food on the table. So Baruch said, I have an opportunity to help out a tzaddik. And he knew that this was a couple of weeks before Pesach, so he decides he's going to spend Pesach with the Rebbe. He goes to the Rebbe's house, he knocks on the door, the Rebbe said, what? He was a Rebbe. He wasn't, nobody knew he was a Rebbe yet, but he was a Rebbe. right? And the Rebbe's wife opens the door and he said, "I want to spend Pesach with you." I was like, "I'm sorry, we don't really have much food. And as a matter of fact, I don't even know how we're going to have food for ourselves. I have to go talk to my husband. We have to figure out how we're going to get money for Pesach." He says, "Don't worry, I'm going to take care of everything. And I want to stay here. I want to spend Pesach with you." Okay. He goes shopping. He buys all the best food. He goes into the house. There's no tables and chairs in the house, so he buys new furniture. And he says to the Rebbe, I don't want you to just, don't tell your husband anything until Pesach. You don't need to mention that there's a guest and that we got food and everything we needed. Okay, fine. So she keeps quiet about it. Pinchas is a little bit surprised that his wife isn't driving him crazy. Pesach is coming up and they don't have any food. And, he knows usually she comes to him and starts nudging him for they need money. But, Baruch Hashem is able to sit and learn. And Pesach night comes, the Seder night comes, and he comes home. And he's surprised to walk into the house. The whole house looks beautiful. There's a beautiful new table and nice chairs, right? And there's delicious food. The whole house smells good. It's well lit up. And he turns to his wife. He's like, "Where did this all come from?" He says, "Well, we have a very honored guest who's spending Pesach with us. And, you covered all of this." Okay, Pinchas is very happy. He thanks Baruch, and they have a beautiful Seder together. And at the end of the Seder, he turns to Baruch and he says, "It was a beautiful meal. Thank you for everything. How can I help you? What can I do for you?" And Baruch says, "I need a bracha to have children." And Pinchas is like, "Of course, I can give you a bracha." He says, "No, it's not that simple." He says, "I don't know if your bracha is going to work. My Rebbe, the Heilige Shpaler Zayda, promised me that I'm not going to have children. So I don't think your bracha is going to work. The only way to work is if you promise me that I'm going to have a son." Okay, Rab Pinchas thinks about this, and he asks him for more details. He tells him the whole story about what he had done and how he had spent the last year, repenting and trying to do tshuva for his mistake, and how he has been davening to Hashem for the last year. And, he asked the Rebbe ready for forgiveness, and he was asking Hashem to forgive him. And finally, Rav Pinchas of Karet says to him, "If my mitzvahs have any value, if my Torah and mitzvah have any value in heaven, I promise you that within a year, you're going to have a son." So the Yisrael of Ruzhin told over the story, said at that moment there was a big commotion up in heaven. Big dilemma, a big problem over there. Right? What do? They have two great tzaddikim who both made a promise. Right? Contradictory promises. How do they, who do they listen to? Who do they listen to? Right? Now, if you were to ask me, I would say, in general, we know that a promise for good is stronger than a promise for something which is not good. The positive promise is stronger than a negative promise. We know a negative promise can be overturned through tshuva, but that's not how they decided to resolve this in heaven, says the Rishon. They decided to look at the records of the Shpaler Zayda and Rav Pinchas of Karetz and see who was more careful when making promises. Who was more careful? Who had a better history of promises? Right? Have either one of them made promises that they chas v'shalom didn't observe completely? No. They looked at the records. They're both very careful with their. They had never made a promise chas v'shalom that they didn't do their best to keep. So they said, let's see if have they made any promises, even true promises before. And they looked at the Shpaler Zayda's history, and they found that he had made many promises in his life. He had made a few promises. They had all been true. He had kept his promise. And they looked at Rav Pinchas of Karetz, and Rav Pinchas of Karetz was extremely careful throughout his life. He tried everything he could to avoid promises. As a matter of fact, this was the first time he made a promise in his whole life. So they said, if this is the first time he made a promise in his life, then this promise is going to be overpower the other promise. Right? Because he's more careful with his words, with his promises. And sure enough, within a year, Baruch had a son, and Baruch was able to have a son. And we see from here that the more careful a person is with his words, the more, as a matter of fact, the Prince of Karetz, I think, told Alter Rebbe that he spent, 21 years working on the Midas HaEmes within himself. And
Alter Rebbe's teacher or student?
yes, he was, yeah. Alter Rebbe learned by him, I think.
Yeah.
So he actually told Alter Rebbe that he had spent 21 years working on the Midas HaEmes within himself. And if we want to know how to make our words more holy, so as we're saying, the holier we treat our words, the holier Hashem will treat it as well. Right? We have a tremendous power with our words, with our tongue. Our words are holy. And the question is, how do we treat our words? Do we use our mouth for holy things? Are we extremely careful every word that comes out of our mouth? If yes, then Hashem says, I'm also going to be very careful with every word that comes out of your mouth. The Yalkut Shemaini on Tehillim, Perek Lamed Daled, tells us a story. I'm not sure if it's a parable or a real story. The Medrash tells us that the king of Persia was once very, very sick. And they called in the best doctors who tried to give him different medicines, and nothing worked. He didn't get any better. So finally, some expert, they wrote in some big specialist from a distant country who came to examine the king, and he said there's only one thing that could cure the king. The king has to drink milk of a lioness. Milk of a lioness. That'll cure the king's illness. Right? Okay.
Who's going to milk the lion?
So today you would go to a zoo and you would find a lioness. Not such a big deal in those days, at least in Persia at that time. They didn't really have any zoos. And how are you going to get milk of a lioness? So the king announces a big reward for anybody who can get milk from a lioness. Some hunter comes to the king and he says, Your Majesty, I can do it. I need you to give me 10 lambs and I'm going to bring you back milk of a lioness. Okay, the king gives him 10 lambs, and the hunter goes out into the jungle to find a lion. He hears the roar of a lion in the distance, and he waits till at night when the lion is sleeping, when the lions are sleeping, and he comes out, he brings one of the lambs, and he ties the lamb to the bottom of the tree, and he climbs up to the top of the tree. The next morning, the lioness gets up, and the hunter starts calling out, making noises. The lioness comes to investigate. And to her surprise, there's a delicious meal, a delicious lamb tied to the bottom of the tree. And this hunter is waving at the lioness from the top of the tree. Okay, fine. The lioness has a good meal, feeds her cubs. Fine. The next morning again, the hunter comes again with another lamb. And this time he's not all the way on top of the tree. He climbs down a little bit lower, a little bit closer. And the lioness comes again, this time really excited, 2 days in a row, a good, delicious meal, right? This time, instead of roaring at the hunter, she, looks at him in a little bit more of a friendly way. The third morning, the hunter comes again, and this time he doesn't climb up the tree. Instead, he puts the lamb down on the floor, and he stands a couple of meters away. And the lioness comes again. This time, the lioness already knows, familiar with the hunter. This is the guy who brings her food. And the lioness eats the lamb, is very happy. And the next day, the hunter comes a little bit closer with the lamb. And by the 7th and 8th day, he's already petting the lioness. And the lioness is very friendly, lets him pet her. And finally, the 10th day, he's so friendly with her that she allows him to milk her. Right? Okay, he's very excited. He has the milk of a lioness. He has to travel now back to the king to bring the king his medicine. The king's going to give him a big reward. He's very excited. He begins traveling, and it gets dark, and he stops to rest for the night. And he goes to sleep, and he has a very strange dream. He has a very strange dream, says the Medrash. In the dream, he sees different limbs of his body are having a conversation. His feet start talking, and they say, it's all to my credit that we managed to accomplish this great feat. I walked out into the middle of the jungle. I got us exactly where we need to go. I'm walking now back to the king to deliver the milk. It's all to my credit. The hands immediately speak up and they're like, no. The feet didn't do much. I was the one who actually milked the lion. The hands are the ones who deserve all the credit. We milked the lion, right? The brain suddenly speaks up and is like, what are you guys talking about? It was all my idea, right? And all the limbs are arguing. They're all trying to take credit for what their part of the story. And then suddenly the tongue speaks up. And the tongue says, it's all me. I was the one who spoke to the king. I was the one who spoke to the king. And all the other limbs look at the little tongue and they're like, get back into your little hole. Your little, what part did you play? Right? You spoke. You didn't actually do anything. And the tongue turns to the other limbs. And he's like, if you don't recognize my value, I'll show you how important I am in this mission. I'll show you how important every single word spoken by the tongue is. Okay, the hunter wakes up. It's a very strange dream. And he goes to the king. He heads back to the king. And he brings him the milk. And he says, Your Majesty, I brought you some really fresh dog milk. And the king looks at the hunter. Dog milk? Dog milk? Guards, arrest him. Throw him into prison. Tomorrow we're going to have him executed in the center of the city. Right? A public execution. Okay, he's thrown into prison. That night, he has a dream. And the tongue is smiling in the dream. The tongue says, see, one word. One word. Look what I was able to accomplish with one word. But don't worry, the tongue says to the other limbs. It's not over yet. Just like I got you into trouble, I can get you out of trouble. All you got to do is agree that I'm the most important part of this mission. Okay, sure, no problem. Right? They all agree. And the next morning, they take him out, and he says, okay, let me go speak to the king before they execute me. I need to speak to the king. Okay, the king agrees to see him, and he says, Your Majesty, why are you so upset at me? And he says, well, you brought me dog milk instead of lion milk. And he says, well, why don't you try it and see if it helps you? You're very sick, right? Yeah, but you said it's dog milk. He says, yes, in certain regions, they refer to a lion as a dog. Right? Today we call a lion a cat. I guess in certain regions they refer to a lion as a dog. And the king tried it, and he got better, and of course the hunter was greatly rewarded. So we have to recognize the power. Yes? Medrash doesn't say what the reward was, but it must have been a pretty great reward if you cured the king. I assume it was a sack of gold. I don't know. I'm not sure what some sort of monetary reward. Medrash doesn't say exactly what happened. It must have been at least 2,000 years ago, but it doesn't. It's unclear if it may be a parable. It sounds like a very strange story, but there's a message that the Medrash is telling us. We have a tremendous power with our words. The question is, how do we view that power? Do we recognize the power of every single word that comes out of our mouth? And this is what the Torah is telling us. Do not profane your words. You have to treat your words as something holy. And this says the Kedusha slavery of Levi Yitzchak Bratitchev of what the Torah is telling us. The Torah says, don't profane your words. Whatever comes out of your mouth, he will do. Whatever comes out of his mouth, he will do. What does he will do mean? It says Levi Yitzchak, it doesn't mean the person will do. It means Hashem will do. Hashem is telling you that if you treat every word that comes out of your mouth as something special, something holy, you don't speak about mundane things, you don't waste your words, you certainly don't say things that aren't true, right? You treat every word that comes out of your mouth as holy. Hashem will treat it as holy as well. And every word that comes out of your mouth, Hashem will fulfill. And just to conclude with the final story, the Gemara in Ksubos, Daf Ayin Zayin Amud Beis tells us that when it came time for Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi to pass away, so they called the angel of death. They called the Malach HaMaves, was called up to heaven, and he said, it's time to take the soul of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. But Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is a big tzaddik. You got to be very careful with him. You got to treat him respectfully, right? So the angel of death approaches Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, And he says, they sent me they sent me a mission from heaven. They told me it's your time, and I have to take your soul. But obviously, I don't want to upset you. Is there anything we can do to make it more pleasant for you, more comfortable for you? You have any last wish, any last request? Says Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, well, I'm about to leave the world. I'm not sure where I'm going yet. Where am I? I would like to know and see where I'm going. So the angel of death says, no problem. I could take you to Gan Eden. You could see where your place in Gan Eden is going to be. I can't take you inside, but I can take you to the wall outside of Gan Eden. You could look over the wall and see where you're going. Okay, wonderful. Let's go. They start to go, and Yeshua ben Levi looks at the angel of death, and he says, I'm not so comfortable. You have this scary-looking sword with you. I'm a little nervous. And the angel of death, okay, what can I do? What should I do with the sword? He says, give it to me. I'll hold on to it. Okay, the angel of death is, I guess, a bit naive. He gives Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi his sword, and they come to the gates surrounding Gan Eden, and the angel of death picks up Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi to look over the wall at his spot in Gan Eden. Yeshua ben Levi immediately jumps over the wall, jumps into Gan Eden. He wants to go and see. He doesn't want to die. He wants to go inside Gan Eden while he's still alive. The angel of death reaches out over the wall and grabs Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's cloak, and he's like, get out. You can't go in like this. It's not how it works. You got to die, and then you go in. There's a process. And Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, who's holding on very tightly, he says, I swear that I will not leave Gan Eden. Now we have a big problem. The angel of death doesn't know what to do. He quickly calls the heavenly court. He quickly calls the judges of the heavenly court, and he says, we have a big problem. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is I'm supposed to take his neshama. I'm supposed to take away his life. I'm supposed to take him outside of Gan Eden. He's supposed to, you can't kill somebody in Gan Eden, I guess. I'm not sure how that would work. But I have to take him out. But he made a promise. He made an oath. So what do we do? So the angel of death says, why don't you annul his oath, right? The person who makes a promise or an oath can have the oath annulled by a rabbi. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, no, I don't do that. I don't annul my oaths. So the heavenly court sits down to deliberate on the matter, and they say, we're going to look through your history, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. If you ever made an oath that you didn't observe, you didn't observe, but that you had annulled for whatever reason, then we're going to annul this oath as well. But if you've never annulled any promise that came out of your mouth, if you made sure to keep everything that came out of your mouth, you never even tried to have anything annulled in the past, then we're going to allow you to keep this promise as well. And sure enough, they looked through his records, and they found that he had never annulled an oath in the past, and they decreed that he should be allowed to keep this oath as well. Now, the angel of death wasn't very happy. He said, I need my sword. And he said, okay, there's a condition. You got to give him back his sword, right? He has a job to do. So he gave him back his sword, but he ended up being one of the few people in our history who was allowed into Gan Eden alive.
Navi was one of them.
Navi also, that's right. What?
How do we know?
How do we know this? The Gemara in Ksubis, the Ayin Zayin Amud Beis, tells us this story.
How do they know?
I don't know. Yes, I guess Ruach HaKodesh, right? So this is something that we all have to do, right? A person who respects his own words will have his words respected by the angels, by the heavenly court, and by Hashem himself. So let us all learn, lo yachel devari, not to profane our words, to treat our words, every word that comes out of our mouth with respect. And in that case, the Torah guarantees us, whatever comes out of our mouth, Hashem will observe. L'chaim, l'chaim.